Okay, so this is the last of the three lost lectures. We're going to be talking about corporate level strategy, horizontal vertical integration, and strategic outsourcing. So this is a pretty short lecture, so hopefully we can get through this relatively quickly. Again, the housekeeping things are less relevant here. So let's go ahead and talk about the lecture here. So we're going to talk about horizontal integration. We're going to talk about vertical integration, and something that wasn't included in the textbook but I think is a helpful idea, the make or buy decision. So what are the factors that would lead a firm to make a product or service, and what are the factors that alternatively would lead a firm to purchase that product or service on the open market. And then we'll finish up talking a little bit more about cooperative relationships, an idea that we've been discussing a little bit over the last couple of lectures. And so a few more ideas to think about when we talk about cooperative relationships. So let's take a step back and talk about corporate level strategy and how that differs a little bit from the business level strategy. And so when we're talking about corporate level strategy, the important thing is to think about choosing strategies that promote the success of each of its individual business level strategies. So what are the things that allow a firm to achieve a sustainable competitive advantage, leading to higher profitability? And so the corporate level strategies are the things that determine the firm's boundaries along these three dimensions: the industry value chain, the range of products or services, and where to compete. So we can think about the business level strategy as decisions related to how to produce. And when we think about corporate level strategies, we're thinking about where to produce. So an example of a corporate level strategy would be a decision about which markets to compete in. Do you compete in the luxury market? Do you compete in international markets? Another idea of a corporate level strategy would be thinking about what are the things that the company makes and what are the things that the company buys. So again, different sorts of decisions. And the idea is that you want these corporate level decisions to be based on not necessarily what's good for the corporation, but decisions that improve the competitive advantage in each of your businesses that you're operating in. Oftentimes we think about business level decisions as what helps the company or what helps the corporation, when in fact what we need to be thinking about in terms of business level or corporate level decisions are decisions that make each business operate better. And so we're going to be talking here about horizontal and vertical integration as ways in which to think about where to operate. So horizontal integration is the acquiring or merging with industry competitors to achieve the competitive advantage that arise from large size and scope of operations. And so an acquisition is when company uses capital resources to purchase another company. And this is an attractive choice when competitors are undervalued in the market. And there are different reasons why a competitor may be undervalued in the market. It may be that it's been poorly managed, and so but if it was properly managed, the assets and capabilities are in place to increase return on investment. It may be from a scandal that something happened at the company, and so its valuation, investors undervalue it. So there are a number of different reasons why a firm may be undervalued. And the interesting thing the interesting thing may be that your company has a competitive advantage in either a knowledge or capability that can be easily applied to the purchased firm. So an example may be, you own a landscaping business, and you have access to some cutting edge lawnmowers that none of your competitors do. And you know that if you purchased your competitors, that you would, because of this advanced technology lawnmower that you have, that you would be able to increase the value that they create, have a higher value creation than they're currently experiencing, and so that would make it an attractive situation in which for you to purchase your competitors. Alternatively, there are mergers, agreements between two companies to pool their resources and operations and join together to better compete in a business or industry. And so this is a situation in which you may have two companies that each have unique knowledge that would benefit, would be stronger together. And so we'll talk a little bit in the next lecture about situations in which that might occur. But today, when we're talking about mergers, we're really focusing on the advantages of economies of scale and that you can gain. So you have two small companies that if they combine to form a new company, neither one is in a position to buy the other one, but because of their smaller size, they're uncompetitive in the market, and so there are advantages for a merger to occur in which to benefit from those economies of scale. So, as I've just mentioned, the benefits of horizontal integration are that it can lower the cost structure. So you can have, instead of having two marketing departments, you have one marketing department. It increases product differentiation. So you may have, a situation in which through a horizontal integration, you're able to, offer different unique products. And it leverages competitive advantage through it reduces buyer power, it reduces rivalry, it reduces those sorts of situations, and increasing bargaining power over suppliers and buyers. And then interestingly, horizontal integration is one of the few ways to acquire tacit knowledge of competitors. This is we see this quite frequently with in the software industry, in the software business, in which one of your competitors, a smaller competitor, has some unique knowledge, some new way of using a coding language, and no individual employee at that company has that knowledge, and there's no way to transfer that knowledge to your company if you wanted to purchase it. And so the only way to acquire it is through the complete acquisition of your competitor. But there are, however, costs of horizontal integration. It's often difficult to implement. There can be huge cultural differences between companies. And this is actually one of the biggest reasons why acquisitions and mergers fail, is because of the cultural differences that exist between two different companies. And something to keep in mind is that declining firms also often have systemic cultural dysfunction, that nobody likes working at a failing company, and that this can, or it may be that the dysfunctional culture is the cause of a company's decline. And turning that around, turning that negative culture can be quite challenging for companies to do. And there also can be conflicts with the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC. So with that the FTC is concerned that in situations in which there's not enough competition in an industry, that there's going to be increased prices, abuse of market power, and that they don't allow competitors to fairly compete. Some of the limitations with mergers and acquisitions. Now, vertical integration is when a company expands its operation either backwards or forwards in an industry. So backwards vertical integration is when the produces inputs for the company's products. So A company purchases one of their suppliers, and forward integration is purchase or merging with the uses, distribution, or sales of the company's products. So if you purchase a distributor of one of your products. And you increase profitability, it facilitates efficiency, enhancing specialized assets. So by purchasing one of your suppliers, you may be able to focus their attention on producing a kind of raw material that you need in a way that's particularly unique for your needs. And it protects product quality. So this is one of the arguments that Elon Musk made with with Tesla selling direct to consumers rather than going through auto dealers, as is the often not just the norm but the legal requirement in many states. But Elon Musk was concerned that traditional auto dealers would not be able to provide their customers with the level of technical knowledge and expertise and quality that was required for his unique automobiles. And so Elon Musk decided to vertically integrate a bit more, or in ways that are unusual in auto manufacturing, to sell directly to consumers rather than to dealers. And also, by having control over your suppliers and of your distributors, that you can improve scheduling, which can be important for a number of different industries. So if we think about the value chain, the typical value chain, raw materials, components in manufacturing, assembly, and then sale, forward integration would be moving into the downstream industries, or backwards integration into upstream industries. So if we look at different industries in the personal computer industry, the raw materials, Dow Chemical, Union Carbide, and then there are retailers, OfficeMax and CompUSA. So an example of forward integration would be if Dell got involved in retail and sold to consumers, and Dell actually did this and was quite successful. They were one of the first computer manufacturers to develop an online retail site, and that proved to be quite an effective move for them. And a backwards integration would be if Dell got into the computer chip manufacturing business. And Apple, interestingly enough, Apple has long produced the computer chips in their iPhones and iPads, and there has been some rumors that Apple is going to continue that backwards vertical integration for their desktop computers, that they're going to be manufacturing the computer chips for their new Macintosh computers moving forward. And part of the reason that they are interested in doing that is that they are now no longer confident that Intel will be able to make the sorts of technological advances to keep up with the demands of consumers. So different ways in which you can integrate vertically, either backwards or forwards along the value chain. So there's a question about when to vertically integrate, and the general idea is if the product or service, if making the product or service in-house is less than the cost, so the cost of producing the product or service in-house is less than the cost of purchasing the product on the open market, then you should vertically integrate, that you should make. So Google hiring programmers to write code in-house rather than contracting out, that it would be too expensive for Google, or it would be more expensive if Google contracted out for its coding than if it hired out for each of its coding. There are disadvantages of making a product. So there's specific things in addition to the actual cost of making a product or service that may make it more expensive to produce in-house. And these include the organizational costs. So the issue is that when employees work for a company, they no longer face direct competition for prices. So if you hire a marketing director, that marketing director knows that he or she is going to have a salary, and so they may be in a situation where they're less efficient. They're not as concerned with being competitive because within the company they have a monopoly. But there are disadvantages from buying from open markets. So the disadvantage of in-house is you lose those competitive forces that drive efficiency and innovation. The disadvantages of buying on the open market is that you have search costs. So you have to go out and find someone. You also run into a situation of opportunism. So if you have an employee, the general idea is that the employee works for the company and their interests are aligned with the company. What's good for that they're going to do what's good for the company. Whereas if you're hiring out, they don't have that sort of bond to the company, and may try and take advantage of you. One way that they can take advantage is through information asymmetries. So your supplier may know something about the good that they're selling you that you don't, and that knowledge may lead to a product being less valuable than you think it is. These are some of the disadvantages that you get from buying on an open market that you have to think about. And sometimes you can run into a situation in which the disadvantages of making in-house, those organizational costs and the lack of competitive pressures, may motivate you to vertically disintegrate. And so you may decide to exit an industry at either the forward or backward of the industry value chain in order to focus on your core areas of expertise. We've talked a lot about different kinds of partnerships and different ways in which you can do strategic alliances, and we can think about them. Another way of thinking about them is through this spectrum of being less integrated and more integrated. So on the extreme integrated, those are when activities are performed in-house. The extreme less integrated is arm's length market transactions. And so some of the things that we've been talking about this semester, they fall in between. And so the short-term contracts and joint ventures are spread out. As always, with this being a business class, it's helpful to have a 2x2 matrix. And so we'll have advantages and disadvantages of either make or buy. So the advantages of using open markets, the advantages of making in-house. So let's finish up here a little bit about cooperative relationships. So we've talked a bit about these throughout the semester, and so here's some additional ideas. And so let's think about some different kinds of cooperative relationships, and we can have quasi-integration, the use of long-term relationships or investments into some of the activities normally performed by suppliers or buyers. And one of the best or one of the most interesting examples of quasi-integration that I've seen are in hospitals. Very often there's a pharmacy, and sometimes these pharmacies are part of the hospital, but sometimes these pharmacies are separate companies. But the pharmacy is located within the hospital. The only customer or the only customers of that pharmacy are patients of the hospital. The patients of the hospital only buy their medication from that one pharmacy. But they're two separate companies, despite the fact that they're in the same building, and they use the same security. So it's a situation of a quasi-integration, two separate companies that essentially operate as one company. You can also do competitive bidding strategies. So an independent component, the suppliers compete to be chosen to supply a particular component, and so an example of competitive bidding that's quite common is government services. Governments, local governments in particular, aren't in a situation in which or they lack the capability to do certain activities that local governments need to do. And they don't want to contract out or they don't want to go to the open market every time they need to use that service. And so what they may set up is a competitive bidding strategy in which you'll have multiple bidders, multiple providers of that service that offer a bid, a multi-year bid often, and that the local government will choose amongst the bidders who will be the supplier, and then they'll have that contract. So, bookkeeping is a very common example where local governments will outsource their bookkeeping, and they'll do a request for proposals. Different bookkeeping companies will submit proposals. They'll submit bids, and then the local government, the city council, will select amongst those bids which one is the best for that city. There's also short-term contracts. So this is a situation in which you sign a contract for less than a year. One of the disadvantages of a short-term contract is it doesn't result in specialized investments, and it signals a lack of long-term commitment to suppliers. And one of the more interesting, or one of the kinds of short-term contracts that's been discussed with some frequency, or maybe I'm just more sensitive to it, are adjunct instructors at universities. So my contract, I have a semester by semester contract. So I'm not paid. It's not that every class Dr. Dixon Fowler goes out and asks who can teach the strategy lecture on mergers and acquisitions, that it's part of a short-term contract. But every semester, the contracts end. And so, the question for me as an instructor is how much knowledge and expertise and specialization should I invest in providing these lectures? Since I don't know if I'm going to be teaching again at Appalachian State, should I really get to know the students in the classes? Should I really think about, well, what are the specific knowledge that would be best to include in my lectures for students at Appalachian State, rather than kind of generic strategy? And then this lack of long-term commitment, it does kind of put somewhat of an oppositional arrangement between me and the university, because I don't feel that the university has my best interests in mind. I would much rather have some job security and knowledge about the future, and so I may be less willing to invest in making these lectures, as good as they possibly could be, because I know at the end of the semester, I don't know if I'll have a job. So there's some interesting things to think about with short-term contracts. So there's some benefits to it. It allows you to choose from the group of potential suppliers, but it also has some costs. Strategic alliances. So we've talked a little bit about strategic alliances and some of the interesting things, and so we've talked more about it in terms of strategic alliances within the context of expanding into new markets, but you can also have strategic alliances for along the vertical integration. And one of the benefits of a strategic alliance is, it helps you avoid some of the bureaucratic costs that might emerge. So, you might have a situation in which you have an accounting firm that forms a strategic alliance with a consulting firm, and so that way the consulting firm, anytime that they need some accounting consulting, they reach out to that firm that they have the strategic alliance with, and so that way, the consulting company doesn't have to have or manage an accounting division for its consulting. So the other benefit is with strategic alliances, that they're interested in forming these strategic alliances because it allows them to access a growing market. So some of the strategies in building long-term cooperative relationships, because the fear with a strategic cooperative relationship is always that the partner in which you're forming the agreement with it doesn't have your best interests in mind, is going to take advantage of the relationship. And so how can you ensure that you're not taken advantage of? And some of the strategies that have been developed include this idea of hostage taking. So it's a means of exchanging valuable resources to guarantee that each partner to an agreement will keep its side of the bargain. So it might be that that you're, if you've got a strategic alliance with a supplier, that they don't get paid until the end consumer is happy with their product. And so that way you can make sure that the partner that you have the strategic alliance with, the supplier that you have the strategic alliance, doesn't sell you a cheap raw material that you need. Credible commitment, so believable promise or pledge to support the development of a long-term relationship between companies. And one of the interesting things, and one of the understudied areas of strategic alliances are these credible commitments. That by having social network ties, so you're friends with an individual in company A is friends with an individual in company B, that social relationship can have advantages in building that cooperative relationship and avoiding some of the opportunism that may occur. And it's important to keep in mind that each company in a strategic alliance, they have some power in order to discipline the partner if the need should arise. And so, creating situations in which you are not, vulnerable to the abuse of power by your partner in a cooperative relationship. So another special kind of cooperative relationship are these strategic outsourcing, and this is a decision to allow one or more of a company's value chain activities to be performed by independent specialist companies. And the benefits of outsourcing include lowering cost structure, enhanced differentiation. So there was an example of that I heard on the radio recently about apartment complexes that are using, they want to integrate smart apartments as part of their product offerings. So having the webcam or the web connected security, and having the electronic locks and the Nest climate control. But the interesting thing, so these are things that normally the apartment complex developers would do themselves. That they would have they would install the HVAC controls, they would install the doorbells, but because of the unique demands of smart doorbells and smart central heating controls, They are now outsourcing to specialized companies that do the smart smart home technology. And so the apartment complex is able to differentiate their products from their competitors because they have this this smart technology. Outsourcing also allows a company to focus on the core business, its core competencies. And so, we see this very often with small businesses. So a marketing firm may have particular expertise in marketing, and the investment of the company in acquiring knowledge and expertise in accounting is not interesting to them. Because it's not an area that they have a particular expertise in. And so resources, time spent by management thinking about accounting takes away from their time focused on their core competency where they're creating the most value, so their benefit of outsourcing. But there are indeed risks of outsourcing. So there's the hold-up risk. So there's the risk of becoming dependent on a specialist provider. So again, we've seen this quite commonly in accounting firms. So companies will outsource their accounting to a company, and then it reaches a situation in which the only people that know how to do the accounting for this company are the specialists that they've hired, and so they may be reluctant or maybe even unable to change accounting firms because of that level of specialization. So there may be another accounting firm that's better, that's offering better prices, or they're more efficient, or but because of that specialized knowledge that the original accounting firm has, they're unable to change. The other problem is increased competition. So the example that I gave earlier about the smart apartment complexes, because these apartment companies or apartment developers are outsourcing, they're using an outside firm. There's nothing to stop their competitors from also using that outside firm. And so all the knowledge about making smart apartments that the initial apartment developer bore the cost of, their competitors get for free. So that's one of the problems. And then there can be a loss of information and lost learning opportunities. So one example that's interesting. So Appalachian State has outsourced the development of its online learning platform. So As You Learn is developed by a company called Moodle. And so the problem is that because Moodle does all of the development and that if faculty at Appalachian State are perhaps less cognizant of things that we could do. What are new ways of using online learning platform? So those are some of the risks of outsourcing. So there are clear benefits and there are also risks. And so your decision to outsource, like many things, will depend on managing these. Now there is a very interesting trend that is emerging, is what we would call the virtual corporation, and these are companies that pursue extensive strategic outsourcing to the extent that they only perform the central value creation function that leads to a competitive advantage. One of the first companies to do this, and one of the kind of textbook examples of a virtual company, is Nike. So Nike actually doesn't produce any of its products. So if you buy a Nike shirt or a Nike soccer ball, Nike didn't manufacture any of those products. But what Nike has is they have a particularly strong competitive advantage in their brand, as well as in research and development. And so Nike can design, great running shoes. They can market, their shirts, but they don't have much of a competitive advantage in manufacturing of shirts and bags and running shoes. And so they've contracted all of that out. And we've seen this trend proliferate, to a point that there are many companies in which they exist in brand name only. So Sara Lee was a great example of this, where before Sara Lee filed for bankruptcy there, basically the only asset that Sara Lee had was that its products were marketed under the Sara Lee brand. But everything was, all the goods were baked by other bakeries. Apple has pursued somewhat of a similar strategy, that its components are all purchased by suppliers, and the phones are manufactured and assembled by Foxconn. And what's interesting to think about with these virtual corporations is if you have different brands that are produced in the same factories, how different are these products truly from each other? And so there's a question about the extent to which this virtual corporation model can continue moving forward. Have we reached a point in which we've gone too far? And I don't know if there's an answer to that, but it is definitely something interesting to think about as all of you make these sorts of decisions about whether or not to outsource in the businesses that you'll be working at. So visually, we can think about outsourcing, so you have full integration, and then there's this idea of taper integration. So a company may use outside suppliers for part of its in-house manufacturing, and then rather than using in-house distributors, they have independent distributors. So an example of a company using independent distributors. So my father, his company manufactured masonry drill bits, and his company was called Carbeats. And at one time, it was the largest masonry drill bit manufacturer in the world. But you could search the world over and never find a Carbeats drill bit. And the reason for that was because the way my father's business was designed was that he would manufacture the drill bits and then sell the drill bits at wholesale prices to distributors. So so if you bought a Black & Decker masonry drill bit in the United States in 1995, that was actually a Carbeats drill bit, but it was sold under the Black & Decker brand. And that drill bit would be sitting right next to that Black & Decker drill bit would be sitting right next to a Vermont American drill bit. But the Vermont American, and what was interesting is that Vermont American drill bit was the same drill bit as the Black & Decker drill bit, just sold by two different companies. So, again, an interesting example or an interesting situation of these virtual companies, but an example of independent distributors. So this is the last of the 3 lost lectures. My apologies for the technical difficulties, but now we're all caught up here. So good luck on the exams. I've extended the deadline for the exams through Sunday evening. So you now have until Sunday at 11:55 p.m. To complete the exam, and then we'll start back up next week with lectures.